This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. As always, we urge our audience, if you're listening on a podcast platform, to follow us. Watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button below, smash the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. My guest today was featured in our May cover story, and I found it fascinating. Mickey Osterreicher, greetings and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You have an interesting background. I stalked you on the web. I had to because I had to learn who you were. General counsel to the National Press Photographers Association, the NPPA, and you are a principal, I guess, of your own law firm, Finnerty, Osterreicher, and Abdullah. Do I have that correct, sir?
Got that right, too.
My God, I'm doing good with names this morning. But you've been an award-winning photojournalist for over 40 years, but you've had your pick. I mean, if anyone Googles Mickey, you'll see he's got a lot of stuff, especially in Getty Photos. But your stuff's been on USA Today, Newsweek, New York Times. You started, though, in Buffalo as a photographer for the Buffalo Courier Express. Is that true?
Well, I actually started as the photo editor of the paper at the University of Buffalo, the Spectrum, but then I had a special major in photojournalism and fortunately got a job even before I graduated with the Buffalo Courier Express back in the early 70s.
We're going to be discussing not photojournalists, but mostly First Amendment and rights, because not only are you a photojournalist and you obviously advise and instruct our industry on First Amendment, especially when it comes to covering the police. Now, this is where it gets a little weird. You are also a police officer, or at least work with the police department? I mean, is this another side of your life, sir?
Yeah, another hat that I wear. I've been a uniform reserve sheriff's deputy with the Erie County Sheriff's Office since 1976. So I understand the challenges of law enforcement. But I also understand how important it is for journalists to be able to do their job.
You are a lawyer, a cop, and an award-winning photojournalist. This is going to be a great story, and we're going to unpack all of that on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
Okay, Mickey, let's start first with this. There's a lot of changes that have happened you and I are both, we're both, I don't know your age, sir, and you look much younger than me, but we both know that Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings. Do I have our era right? So I entered this industry in the 70s, okay? And, as a radio guy, I had a team. I was running a radio station of news people. They walked around with huge tape players around their neck, managed a TV station in Maine in the 90s. I'd send out shooters with big cameras and reporters. It's hard to recognize a reporter today, right? With everybody's going out with their phones now, just like anybody else. Is that a challenge today when a reporter is on a scene of being recognized as a reporter? I mean, what's going on, in your opinion, when it comes to recognizing the press, when it comes to tricky situations like this?
There's just so many challenges, but the biggest one I get from all sides is, who is a journalist? When there's an order to disperse and there's an exemption for journalists, who does that apply to? If there's a curfew, as we saw during the pandemic and some of the social justice protests, and journalists almost always are identified as essential personnel by the governor when he or she signs that executive order. Who is qualified under that to then stay out after the curfew? And it's a challenge for both journalists to figure out and actually be able to assert those rights, and a bigger challenge for officers when a journalist is saying, wait a minute, I can stay, and they have no idea whether they can or they can't.
Okay, we're gonna get down to the weeds in a little bit, because I want you to offer some sincere advice to the thousands of news publishers here, how to handle any situation. But let's stay at 30,000 feet and discuss that first thing you said. What the heck is a journalist? You understand that there's legislation trying to be passed right now to support local journalism in our society, which is going through some financial crises, right? I mean, big tech takes a lot of money off. We're not getting the advertising revenues we used to get. Classifieds are now, no longer part of that funneling into journalism. So now we're trying to find a way to define what journalism is in order for compensation. But in our society, I mean, you've studied this, you're a First Amendment lawyer. How do you take a constitutional democracy like ours, in your opinion, or a republic, I guess, that offers a free and unfettered press where we can't license journalists, define them, have the government say, you're a journalist, you're not? How do we define journalism? Can I stay there for a second? What in your mind, does it ever bug you? Do you ever think that through and try to come up with the other side of that equation?
It's not the 64,000, it's the $64 million question. And if anybody could answer that, they really deserve all that money. This has been going on for quite a while. It just is getting worse. For the most part, I think people know that pretty much every state has a shield law, which provides a qualified privilege to those people who are defined under that, for them not to have to reveal their sources, not to give them their outtakes, their notes, things like that. But there's never been a federal shield law. And back during the Obama administration was the first time, or it was the closest we ever came to getting a federal shield law. I was there in the Senate for the markup, because we'd been working on it very hard. And the biggest stumbling block, once again, was how do we find this class that will be entitled to that privilege? And nobody could come up with an acceptable definition. Just to broaden things to make them matters even worse, back in the day when I was a journalist running around either as a still photographer with like 3 Nikons around my neck, or in broadcast when I had a big Betacam on my shoulder, there was nobody else out on the street with cameras. It was really easy. There's a journalist, there's a journalist. There are a handful of us that had those. If you were from radio, you usually had some type of recorder and a microphone. Now, pretty much, whether you're a photographer for a paper, and so many papers, unfortunately, have no photo staff anymore, or you're being sent out as a reporter but told to take pictures and shoot video, and you're sent out with your iPhone or some type of device in your phone that also has the ability to take and record images. So you're out there, you're a young person, and you look just like all the other people who are out there protesting, but you want some additional rights that they may not have when they're ordered to disperse or they're told there's a curfew.
Right, so
and we'll add one more level of complication to just show you how thrilling this subject is. Many police officers rely on credentials, some form of identification.
Right.
So, people can make them up, but let's just stick with you've got a form of identification, a valid form of identification, whether it's issued by your police department or your company. Because of the nature of things these days, it's not just, for years, it was the police who didn't want to be photographed or recorded. Now it's the protesters. who are going after journalists and saying, you don't have my consent to take my photograph or to record me. And so journalists are putting those credentials away inside their shirts, making it much more difficult for the police to recognize them, since they now look like everybody else and don't necessarily have a big beta cam or a DSLR or something that looks professional. And so you throw that in, and we've got a perfect storm of how do we figure out who's who? And it makes everyone's job a whole lot harder.
All right, so let's separate two forms of local journalism. Let's take the cities out of the mix for a second. I mean, because, we can talk George Floyd, we can talk Atlanta, where there's just tons and tons of journalism and freelancers. A lot of this audience, Mickey, is small, local, hyper-local news organizations just trying to survive and serve their job as a voice for their local communities. And I'm sure you've read about, of course, you're news deserts and all that. Some experts have come on this program, and we've done stories that it's okay to become more empathetic towards the police. If you were now advising a person in a small town who's running a local operation, should you get to know the police force, let them know who your journalists are, and form some kind of an idea so it makes it easier when the crises do occur? Or is that just stepping over boundaries? I'm just asking your opinion, sir.
Not at all. And it's part of the training they do, again, with both the journalists and law enforcement. And the training is the same. It's not like I train the journalists and tell them one thing, and I train the police and I tell them another. It's the exact same training. Maybe it's framed a little differently, but it's the exact same training. And my mantra is communication. I urge law enforcement to reach out to their local news media and get to know them. And I do the same for the news media, and independent journalists. Don't wait for, a huge riot or protest to break out to try and figure out what the rules of engagement are going to be. It's a whole lot better when people recognize one another, understand their roles and responsibilities, understand that both groups have a lot more in common than they think. First of all, when there's something bad happening, first responders, law enforcement are going towards it. So are the media, whereas everybody's normally going in the opposite direction. During COVID, neither law enforcement nor journalists, really, especially visual journalists, could work from home. They had to be out there. They had to photograph. They had to record to do their job. And the third thing is that both professions are often highly criticized for the jobs that we do. So there's a lot of commonality there, and there needs to be this discussion. Don't expect to just show up and understand what's going on and have the police just go, oh yeah, sure, it's fine. You can be, you need to have conversations, and they need to know you as people, especially, as you said, in a small community. It's much more difficult, let's say in New York City, where there are, tens of thousands of police officers and hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of people. So in a small community, much better, have conversations, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, whether you come to them, they come to you, or you meet on neutral ground, and you talk about things, and you talk about issues, and you talk about what ifs. And then when, forget about protests, when there's an accident, when there's a homicide, when there's a matter of public concern, and you show up on the scene, you understand, and they say, oh, it's not the media is here. It's, oh, John is here, or Mary is here. And it makes a huge difference. And again, when you're looking at them, it's not like, oh, the cops. It's, oh, it's Lieutenant so-and-so or Captain so-and-so. And you're having a conversation at a much different level.
I want your opinion on our democracy. I always say, and I keep writing editorials, that some very imperfect men way back when, 240 some odd years ago, wrote a perfect document. They sat down and built a democracy based on the fact that final check on power is a free and unfettered press. No government intervention. where other societies across our planet tend to be okay with some government and some definition of press. Could this backfire? In other words, let's assume now someone's just got a camera and they start figuring out that if I just want to walk around and say, well, I want to be a reporter to a cop, or I could be a reporter, I plan to file. Are we at a place now, in your humble opinion, sir, because you've got this, you're a major voice for a big part of our industry, which is now moving in a whole mess of different directions with AI, with photojournal. I mean, you almost just want to retire, don't you? Because the next few decades are going to be massive. Are we at a precipice now where with social media and mobile cameras and all this and more, that there should be some definition? Should there be some amendment? Can we survive if there is a defined press, or where's your head on that, sir, if I may ask?
Well, you're right. It's you might have seen my reaction when you said AI, and that is going to be a huge problem. It's not going to be. It already is a huge problem, and we've been talking about that quite a number of us already, because I'm seeing things that are put up there, and it says clearly AI, and it's explained this is not a real image. People, if they want to buy into it, if it kind of reinforces what it is that they like, then they don't care that it says AI. They think, yeah, that really happened.
That's news.
And then, for those that have been saying fake news for so many years, now you can have a video, you can have a still that's very real and really did happen, and they can just say AI, it's fake. There used to be two things when I was growing up, and certainly in journalism, was don't believe everything you read, and seeing is believing. Unfortunately, seeing is believing is not a truism anymore. And that is going to be very difficult, especially for visual journalists. And, to part of your first question, there are a number of people out there these days, they call themselves First Amendment auditors. And they do go around. It's not like they're actually covering an event. They will go and stand in front of police stations or wander into their parking lots, carrying their cameras, or go into their lobbies. And they're basically trying to see if they can get a bad reaction from officers, if they can bait them into acting foolishly for the camera. And then they get all these YouTube hits, and it becomes a game, which then makes it harder for journalists who are actually trying to cover matters of public concern, because they all get lumped in with, there's a guy with a camera, they're pains in the neck, we don't like anybody with cameras, we just wish they would all disappear. And so you're absolutely right that it's very difficult. I don't think it should be the government that defines who is or isn't a journalist. I think it's the last thing that anybody wants. We've seen
we could police ourselves.
Well, I think we should. We've seen lots of law enforcement agencies who've gotten out of the business of issuing press credentials. They didn't want to have to decide who qualifies for one, who doesn't qualify for one. And then, as you mentioned, I think the real one of the real problems for journalism these days is the fact that there are so many news organizations that are being bought up by people who are not basically interested as much in journalism as they are in the bottom line. I think, for years, everybody, of course, you have to remain viable to be a business, but there unfortunately, I feel like we're losing news organizations and the ability to cover matters of public concern more from the inside than from the outside. But that's just my opinion.
But, and we'll leave it at that. But my opinion, someone somehow has to define truth in journalism, whether we do it ourselves, and define what journalism is. And I think a lot of these other problems could slowly but surely start to come to pass. But we're at a precipice, don't you agree? I mean, we're at a moment of truth where it's being tested. And
absolutely. That's why I have a little sign on my desk that says "Bang head here."
You know something? Thank you, sir. I'm always trying to find the perfect pull quote from every interview, and you just gave it to me. So, and that's a good one. So, Mickey Osterreicher, obviously general counsel of the National Press Photographers Association, award-winning photojournalist, educator who educates both sides of the equation, both are, law enforcement as well as journalists. If someone wants more information about your services, what you do, how to get a hold of you, Mickey, do you have a website or some way that people can just, find you?
Sure. Well, we have a website. It's nppa.org. And my email is real easy. It's lawyer@nppa.org. And the other thing for people to know, if they want some training for their police departments or for their journalists, we have a grant from the Knight Foundation, and I have been doing lots of training under that. It's not like NPPA has money, that we don't know what to do with. We're a small organization. We do a whole lot with very little. But we definitely are out there, and as I said, I've been doing training. I just did it with the Los Angeles Police and Sheriff's Department. I did it with the Minnesota State Patrol as a settlement of a federal civil rights lawsuit. Trained all of the 600 plus troopers that they had over a period of a few months. So, we're there, and we're always willing, and hopefully we'll be able to help in some way.
Mickey, keep up the good fight and stay in touch with us, please.
Thank you. And thank you again for having me. This has been lots of fun. And as we both realized, we could sit here and do this for a few hours.